Hey everyone, it's Spencer from Pool Genius, and I'm joined by our lead analyst, Jason Lisk. And today we're going to break down Circa Survivor week number 4. Most of you probably survived up to this point. We've had quite the advancement rate through the first 3 weeks. Actually, caught a couple of upsets last week. We're going to talk about that coming up here and what's ahead for week 4, as well as future value planning. But first off, if you find this information that we put together in these videos helpful, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to our channel here on YouTube. Really helps us out, really signals to us that you appreciate what we're doing. Really keeps us going. So if you appreciate it, if you come back here every week to get your NFL Survivor, Pick'em, Circa Survivor strategy, go ahead, let us know by subscribing and liking. So Jason, last week we had a little bit of a shakeup in the standings. Nothing too drastic. I think it was the Packers were around 10% and Atlanta a little bit lower than that. So we had about 18-ish% was knocked out last week. How does that affect things moving forward for you? And how many winners do you see potentially splitting the pot at the end of the rainbow, the 20-win rainbow that is Circa Survivor?
Yeah, not many, but you know what? At Full Genius, we did have some Packers in play. We did not have Falcons, and that ending to that game was a big gut punch, I know, for a segment of us with how they blew the 10-point lead and then had the field goal to win it, and instead, the Browns get one at the end of regulation after the block. So that was tough. I think the projection overall last week was a fairly average Survivor type week. You usually get an upset or two. You usually get like a median would be about 80% in Circa. Like it's kind of one of those things where you go along. There's some high Survivor weeks. There's some average ones in the 70 to 80 range, and then at about 2 or 3 times a year, there's a big wipeout that'll take out. The most popular team will lose. Maybe it's a 40% pick team. Maybe there's multiple like week 3 last year, or I think 4 of the 5 most popular lost and only like 20% of the pot advance. Those are the outcomes that really drive it down. So I'm still sticking with 22.5, but there's such a wide range around that. Like if the popular plays hit all year, we could definitely have triple digit number of winners that get to the end, right? If there's no big 40% losses, that's in play. But there's also outcomes where like the holiday weeks, which could be concentrated on certain teams. If those teams lose, like let's say a Philadelphia loses to a Chicago or a Washington to Dallas on Christmas, that could really chop the pool quite a bit. So it's still in play that we could get single digits as well. Like all those outcomes are going to depend on some of those concentrated weeks and what happens. So all that's in play. I would still put the over under right around 22.5, low 20s. That's kind of the average outcome.
Yeah, and we put that out on Twitter. We kind of ran a poll or just asking for comments from people that are playing and following Circa. And Jeffrey Benson, who is in charge of handling a lot of the specifics with the contest behind the counter there at Circa, was pleading that it was the under. He does not want that many winners for obvious reasons.
Yeah, he's definitely got a vested interest for work reasons, like, he doesn't wanna process the paperwork for a large number of winners who are splitting things with others and quite the headache. It seemed to me I did not count every comment, but it seemed to me we might have a good number because it seemed like some people were like, "Oh, it's clearly going over," and others were like, "Oh, it's going under." And so there was quite a range of reactions, on what people thought would happen, and so I think all that's still in play because again, it only takes one of those big weeks to really change the outlook. And so while we have 17 left, there's still plenty of opportunity for those weeks to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go ahead and look at week 4 here. If you want to pull up the season planner slash data grid tool that we have specifically for Circus Survivor. And I want to remind you guys that we do have a Circus Survivor product, standalone product that these tools specifically built for the Circus Survivor contest, factors in the holiday weeks, everything. I will link that in the description below. We are also running a free 3-day trial, so you can try it out, see what the tools are all about, upload your entries, things like that. And we actually have a free tracking tool where you can go in, find your entry name. And yeah, if you're sharing some entries with other individuals, you can load those entries into your portfolio too. Gives you one dashboard where you can see everything laid out in front of you. And it's really good. It's really good for organizing and visualizing and planning what teams you've already used and where you want to go this week. So, speaking to that point this week, a lot of people are going to go Buffalo. Is that right, Jason?
I mean, I think they're probably gonna be the most common. They certainly are a big favorite. It might be the biggest favorite we see all year. We'll see. I mean, I think unless because we basically have one of the top 2 to 3 teams in the NFL going against number 32, and that top team playing at home. So, unless we catch a team late in the year that, let's say, lost its starting quarterback, has a slew of injuries, is down to its 3rd stringer, going against a really good team, we may not see a number like this again. It, 'cause, Baltimore doesn't play the Saints, and so I think you're not gonna see this. Even the Saints are gonna be a big dog, but not to this level against other teams, and so this may be the biggest one out there. So it's one you gotta think about, right? And we'll get into that in a bit, but I will say I am not 100% confident about all these projections in this sense, right? And I say this, I probably wasn't that confident last week, and we nailed it, right? Last week, if you followed along to our projections on the contest, we actually averaged within about 1.4% on all the teams that drew any popularity. We were 1% off on Seattle. We had 40, they were at 39 when the contest closed. We nailed Kansas City, we nailed Indianapolis, we nailed Green Bay. The only one I was slightly under on Buffalo, and that was pretty much it. And, because I thought the Thursday factor might lead fewer people to pick them, but they still came in near my number, at 4% within my number. And so that is to say we did pretty good last week, nailed the exact order. I'm slightly less confident about the order this week because it could go any number of ways. I've seen some comments out there. Derek Stevens just said he thinks Buffalo will be super popular. Did he say 50%?
He said north of 50%. Yes.
I mean, I'll lay out why that's probably not happening, right? First of all, they're only available. As you can see, we have an availability column there. And so that's the actual contest availability. That's what percent of entries can pick them this week. So Buffalo, the numbers are 74%. So anything north of 37% would mean over half of the people, of the entries that have them available are taking them this week. We are still early in this contest, and there are still a lot of people with 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5 entries left, right? And most of those people probably aren't jamming all in on Buffalo. So you're going to get some diversified picks off Buffalo just by that factor, right? Even if the how we do we have the political polling on election night, and they're talking about where swing states broke and which counties broke which way. Well, even if unlike the single issue voters, even if the single entry voters break heavily Buffalo, I don't think the rest are going to break anywhere close to 50%. So that's one factor. I think if it was a smaller pool with a lot more single entry players, maybe. The other factor is Buffalo just has so many value spots. Like if you look at this week, right? Buffalo has high win odds, but then there's a bunch of options on this board that are above 70%. And so relative to some of the other weeks we're going to see this year, for people that are looking ahead, there's lots of weeks that are far more difficult in finding other options. And so if you're looking at it like, well, this is a better option in week 4 for me than what I'm going to have in week 10 if I've used all these teams, well, then you're going to maybe lean towards saving a Buffalo. And so I think you're going to have enough of that where I would be stunned if over half of the entries that have them available used them. So I think anything north of 37 is probably unlikely. That said, 30s and a big chunk of them, yeah, I think this is a spot where you're going to see Buffalo used.
Yeah, and we have to talk about, like you brought up, those future spots for Buffalo. We have to talk about next week because, I mean, that's the least fragile spot that you're gonna use them, moving forward. Like, it's just a week away. They have Sunday Night Football against the Patriots at home. They have the projected second highest win odds of the week next week. Number 1 is Baltimore, who you might wanna save for Thanksgiving, or you may have used already on some entries. And then there's also Detroit is in the 3rd spot with Buffalo at 2nd. Detroit at Cincinnati, and Detroit's looking like they will definitely be usable later in the year. I'm seeing that one against the Giants week 12 popping. Plus, they are another holiday team that you might want to keep in your back pocket. Then you have the Cardinals, and remember the Cardinals were very popular in the first 2 weeks of the year. So, um, the the thing that I would bring up there is if you're thinking about Buffalo, it comes down to whether you use the Cardinals or not. And if you use the Cardinals on some entries, I want you to take a close look at that week 5 and say, who are you going to play? Because if you don't want to do Baltimore or Detroit, and you already used the Cardinals, you're looking at the Colts probably versus the Raiders,
Mhm.
which that's more than fine. Like the way those 2 teams have performed so far, I think that's a certainly plausible option in week 5. Then again, the Colts week 8 versus the Titans, you might want to save them for that spot. You have the Vikings, overseas against the Browns in week 5, and that's probably gonna be a weird defensive slugfest, so I don't know if you want any piece of that. The only thing I would encourage is to do that future value planning at least 1 week out and make your plan for week 5 if you've already used Arizona, and the decision tree kinda flows that way as to whether to use Buffalo or not.
Yeah, I would say on that, like, as you think about it, I think as you said, Indianapolis is fine as a pick, right? Based on what we know now. Arizona is fine as a pick against the Titans. Both of those things are fine, but you know what's going to happen is those are going to be the 2 most popular picks. I feel pretty confident next week saying that. In some order, those are probably your chalk because people are going to want to save Baltimore because Detroit. If they don't, I don't think they'll be used more heavily next week than this week as people think about saving them. We'll see where the numbers end up. And then Buffalo, who, if Buffalo does post a 30% number, they're just simply not going to be, you're not going to be able to see a big number on Buffalo anymore. And so, think about that. That doesn't mean like if I had Arizona used, I'm thinking more of not using Buffalo on that entry if I have multiple entries where I could think about it. Because I would want to keep that optionality open, right? I want to keep that option open on Arizona or Indy, like because honestly, Indy could be useful in several other weeks in the future, so you don't have to pot commit. But what you don't want is to be, oh, my only choice is now Indy, and then some news come out or the line move against you, and then you're like deciding between that and Minnesota, as you said, where I think you're giving up a lot of value, or you have to use Baltimore, and I don't think you want to do. I think you want to plan the season out in ways where you can avoid using Baltimore while still getting good value if you can, and use Baltimore when you need to get that good value. And so that's how I would play it is probably think about saving them more on Buffalo entries or saving on Arizona entries than I would on those that had Arizona available that gave me that option. Because Arizona's been used by over half the pool right now. And so even if a lot of people use Arizona, that number's capped, right? It's capped. They're probably gonna be popular. I bet more than 2/3 of the people that have them use them next week if the numbers hold. But that probably puts an upper cap in the low 30s on how many will use Arizona, and the rest will flow to the Colts.
Right. Yeah, so Buffalo this week, pretty self-explanatory. It's more of the decision of the future of what you wanna do. Do you wanna use them now at 90% win odds, or do you wanna preserve them for those future weeks, particularly week 5, and beyond? So if you're not doing Buffalo, or if you have multiple entries and you're mixing things up, we have a couple logical choices that are favored by a touchdown or more. Actually, we have 4 more teams as of we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon that are favored by at least a touchdown, and one of them is the Houston Texans. I should say the 0-3 Houston Texans, but really, I think Houston has played better than that 0-3 designation. You could legitimately make a case. Did they deserve to lose those games? Sure, but they were in all of them. It came down to the wire. Every game, you remember week 1 at the LA Rams, They had the ball and they were driving for a game-winning drive, and they fumbled in Rams territory, and the game was over. Week 2, they took the lead with less than 2 minutes to play. Baker Mayfield marched down the field, had another comeback game-winning drive against Houston, and then last week, they had another opportunity to put Jacksonville away late in the 4th. Nico Collins fumbles in the red zone. Jacksonville ends up winning that game. So, I mean, their offensive line is bad. I think we can say that right now. Their running game is basically non-existent. Their defense is good, and the most important part of this equation right here for Houston is they're at home against the Titans. And it really comes down to that, Jason, and we have 25% pick popularity listed for them early in the week here. Do you think they're gonna get up to that, or do you think the public is gonna be like, "Hey, I'm not so sure about the Texans. I don't know if I wanna do it."
Yeah.
Give me the quote unquote "free square," I'm saying this as the public views it, in the Buffalo Bills this week.
I think that's certainly in play. I've got them projected well up, they're certainly above the public numbers we're seeing across contests. And that's because how people in Circuit have behaved in the past, which is to tend to boost up, especially the lowest future value team with the highest win odds, which that's Houston this week, right? And so they tend to go for a number above what you would see in a typical pool because they save you that future value. Houston has dropped. Okay. Houston, like you said, are they that bad? They're middle of the pack to slightly below average in our ratings now because of the results. But like you said, they haven't been blown out and they played what I would call at least a decent to above average set of opponents on average. They played two teams that were in the playoffs last year, and they played Jacksonville, who looks like an improved team that is at least a close to 500 team on the road, and it was in it. So I mean, Houston is a more of a middle tier team who has a great defense, a really good defense, and the offense is struggling. The Titans are possibly the worst team outside of New Orleans, especially when you take into the coaching, what they're doing. And the net result of all that is Houston's fallen outside of our top 20 in future value as of right now. Now they could turn things around and move back, but they're right on that edge where you may have to use them, you may not. But then you're like evaluating, is this a good spot to use them, right? Is this a good spot if they're at 75%? And you don't have a ton of these. We saw Seattle just above this last week at double this popularity. And so I don't know, like, part of me feels like because you have the Buffalo option, because somebody could fall back to Detroit, and because all these other teams are in the mix, you're getting a little bit of cover, but I don't expect them to come in at like 15%. Will it be 20 instead of 24? I'm weighing that. Like I guess I would be more surprised if they came in at 30 than if they came in at 20. So maybe I need to lower them slightly, but I do think they're in this range. I think enough people will use them that Houston is in this range because of that low future value.
Yeah, they are your future value saving pick this week. That's definitely for sure. We have maybe there's one other future value saving pick, and I would go a little further down the board and look to them. You can see it on the right hand side there of our Circa Survivor data grid. It's the New England Patriots, a 5.5 point favorite as we see it now against Carolina at home. We have projected for about 6% pick popularity in Circa. Are they a sneaky good pick here, or do you wanna save them for the future, or are they just sort of a team that you're blending into a portfolio, or how do you look at the Patriots this week?
Yeah, so I actually raised their projection here this morning, and I've got them now at 8. I do think they're trending up as I study this board and just study the week in general. So I do think they're gonna siphon off some of the Houston picks, um, maybe for that reason, because it's not like they're that much below. I do think as of right now, their schedule's easier, and so that's why they have a little more future value. It's not a ton more, but there are a few weeks where, like this, New England will pop up as one of those alternatives more than maybe Houston looks like they might. And so, New England's definitely that option because everybody else, I mean, if you look at the other teams in play, The next lowest future value is the Chargers. We can talk about them in a bit, but there's a pretty big difference between Chargers value in future weeks and New England and Houston.
Right. Let's talk about the team in between there that will be semi-popular this week. It's the Detroit Lions against the Cleveland Browns. Detroit playing at home looked outstanding the past 2 weeks. They flopped week 1 at Green Bay. It appears that's more of an anomaly than anything else. They look back to their NFC Championship form of the previous 2 seasons.
Right.
Now, they are hosting the Browns. Good defense by the Browns. Kinda got lucky finding some points last week. I don't really wanna rehash that, because we were on Green Bay and fell victim to the Browns last week. But, the Lions also play on the holidays. So, like, how do you think the public is gonna treat the Lions? We have them at 14% here, almost 80% win odds. How do you view the Lions, and how does the public view the Lions?
That's the big question this week. How does the public in Circa view the Lions, not only for this week, but for the contest? And that's we're educated guessing here, because what I've seen in the public pick data this week already is that Detroit's getting steamed up. They are moving like in just our general data. I raised them today, and I'm also raised them in this contest because I think I opened it a little lower than that 14% number on Tuesday when I first said it, thinking people would be more inclined to save them. Because I see them trending up, it seems like there's a segment of people that are certainly willing to look at Buffalo versus Detroit and say, they're both double-digit favorites. Detroit's close enough, and I can save Buffalo, so why wouldn't I use Detroit? Now, those are in pools that don't necessarily have the Circa holiday features, and so I do expect it to come down off that, but how much? Because this is about half of what the public numbers come. And so I'm cutting it in half. I don't know if that's too much of a cut, because here's the debate, and here's why I think there's a wide range of outcomes around Detroit. Yes, they play on both holidays. Some people will have very binary thinking. Washington's the bigger favorite. I don't necessarily need to save Detroit. Philadelphia and Baltimore are the bigger favorites. I don't necessarily need to save Detroit. Some people will think like that and probably not concern themselves with saving, right? And then others, I would tend to fall more in this camp is we don't know exactly how things are going to break. And even if they're a little below in win odds, they still may be a leverage play when you get to those weeks if they're favored, like at very low ownership. So I wouldn't rule them out. So I'd be more inclined to save in this spot, because I do think there's a difference between a team that's a 16.5-point favorite and a 10-point favorite in their risk factors. But that's just my way of thinking. Others may break on Detroit. Here's the other thing I would say in Detroit. They have high future value in general. Yes, they're not Buffalo, but they do have not only those 2 holiday weeks, but they have, I think week 12 is going to be a potential spot where, let's say you decide not to save them for week 13 and you use them in week 12. That could be a great spot. There's next week, they could be that like alternative to Arizona, Indianapolis. If you wanted to come in and maybe catch a couple big upsets that wipe out the pool. So there's spots for Detroit. I think that's why they show up as our third future value team, right behind Baltimore and Buffalo.
Yeah, and there's I mean, just the way Detroit's playing and what they showed on Monday Night Football, what they showed the past 2 weeks, you could certainly envision a scenario where it comes time for Thanksgiving, comes time for Christmas, where they are a reasonable favorite. I mean, Thanksgiving is gonna be home against Green Bay. We don't know what Green Bay is gonna look like then. A lot of things can change, and then Christmas is at Minnesota, I believe. So that's we don't really know what the Vikings are right now. The Vikings are kinda going through it.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
yeah, they're not a bad team to keep in your back pocket for those.
if you showed up at Thanksgiving with, let's say, a -4, a 4-point favorite on Detroit, but over 80% of the pool was on Philadelphia and Baltimore combined.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a massive leverage spot where those are the kind of outcome and weeks you need to hit the big results, is to basically be off when everybody's on a couple other teams. And so that's I think in play on Detroit. Like I'm not necessarily eager to give that up. I will do it. I'll play Baltimore. If I've used Baltimore, by the way, I'm not using Detroit here. Or Philadelphia. I think I don't think you want to pot commit to one specific team yet in Thanksgiving.
Yeah, that's a great point. Um, as far as the other teams that are in play that people are going to be considering for week 4, I'm gonna kinda batch these together and ask you collectively what you think of them. You can pull out whichever one you want and discuss it a little more if need be, but we have all around, favored by a touchdown-ish, some a little more, some a little less. We have Denver, LA Chargers, and Green Bay all this week. Denver is home against Cincinnati without Joe Burrow. The Chargers are on the road at the Giants, who are now starting Jackson Dart at quarterback. Green Bay is at Dallas, favored by 6.5. How do you feel about this group? Little lower pick popularity. You could argue there's medium future value with some of them. Green Bay maybe a little higher on this list in terms of future value. Um, but how do you feel? Does anyone jump out at you from this range? And how are you going through these teams?
They're they all have their cases and arguments, and I think probably what I'd wanna do is pick one. I don't I'm not gonna sit here and say you must pick this team. I think I would probably wanna be on one and off the other 2 as I think about it strategically, like how to pull a portfolio. Um, Similar future value as you said, because, here's the shape of their future value. Maybe this is important to think about. I think Green Bay is a Thanksgiving team, but the odds now after what we've seen out of Detroit that they're a notable favorite is probably pretty slim. It would take a Goff injury, a St. Brown injury, a Gibbs injury, an injury to Penei Sewell, multiple players for them to be, I think, a notable favorite enough to think about playing. And pretty much all their other value, I think, is before Thanksgiving. It's gonna be in the midweeks. So, they're the kind of team that is valuable, but it's also gonna be value that's largely realized in the middle of the season, between now and the middle of the season. Um, Denver, similar. They play on Christmas. Maybe there's a little more chance that they could be favored on Christmas if Mahomes is out. Maybe there's, I guess, a more of a path, though I still think they're gonna be the dog. Um, but other than that game, you're probably gonna wanna consider them before by week 10. And so they're kind of from here on in. Whereas the Chargers, I think, have excellent late value, sneaky late value in this contest. Um, they are the people talk about the holiday weeks, right? You got to have a pick for holidays. If you look at this year's slates, weeks 13B, which is the Sunday after Thanksgiving, and week 17B, the Sunday after the Christmas games, are probably 2 of the toughest weeks in terms of what looks like is out there right now. And even though they're not like massive favorites, the Chargers are our highest projected win odds on both of those. And so they're the kind of team that I'm probably like, if not enough people are realizing that, they have sneaky future value where, yeah, they're not like the most, people might want to play him at 3-0 and think this is a great spot to play him, Jackson Dart's first start, but it is on the road. Their win odds are certainly no better than a bunch of other teams on here. And if you're playing the late value game, I think the Chargers are one of those that could be a high leverage play late in the contest.
Yeah, and I remember you and I breaking that down before the season even started. We were at Circa Ultimate Contest weekend, and we are going through potential weeks that could give people problems. And we noted that the 13B and 17B slates were pretty slim pickings. Like everyone's focused on those thin actual holiday slates, but then coming around and making another pick the next Sunday is not an easy task either. So you definitely need to plan around that. And I think the Chargers are a reasonable landing spot to keep in your back pocket for that. Of course, you don't have to. A lot of things change, but if you want that adaptability, it's at least something to keep in mind as you consider using the Chargers either now or in future weeks before those holiday weeks come up. But as you're going through this, Jason, um, the more and more I look at Denver and the more I look at just the numbers of they're favored by more than a touchdown, they're at home against the Bengals. people aren't really sold on Bo Nix. Bo Nix has looked very pedestrian, I guess would be putting it nicely this year. Um, but maybe playing a not so great Cincinnati defense gets him going. But what I'm getting at is they're gonna be unpopular,
Mhm.
and looking at our season planner, this is the highest win odds we have for them moving forward throughout the season. Of course, things could change. They have a couple of decent spots later that you want to plan around. Most notably, I would bring up week number 10 because that is another week that we pointed out is pretty slim pickings.
Yeah.
Week number 10, you might want to keep Denver in your back pocket for that. But if you have multiple entries, if you want to save Buffalo for either week 5 or something else, I think Denver is a decent hedge against all of that. How do you feel about the Broncos? Because just the way the numbers sit right now, I think they're in play.
They definitely are in play. I think what you laid out also, they were the most popular pick in week 1 in the contest.
Yeah.
So they are gonna come in at right now, let's find that number. They are 59% available. So a little more than half have them, and that's gonna influence that number too, right? So they might be at 10, they might be 11 if they were fully available, but they're not. And so that's holding it down a little bit, plus those other weeks that you mentioned. And the Christmas factor may cause people to hold them just a bit. So I think you're looking at them being held down a little bit, and this is probably one of those spots to consider. You mentioned some others. I think this is one of of the 3 best remaining spots. So particularly if you're one that avoided Denver in week 1 or just sprinkled a little bit but was way underweight, this might be a spot to consider coming back with Denver after you saved them. Because they do give you, I mean, where are they at in win odds? You just laid it out. They're third, roughly tied for third, in third for this week in market odds. So they're basically up there. They are the slightly better version of Houston, right? The offense has struggled. The defense is really good. And the difference is they got to play Titans in week 1. Houston plays them this week. But otherwise, Denver's lost. Imagine if Denver had played the Rams in week 1 and otherwise played their same schedule. We might be talking about Denver being the team nobody wants to touch because they're 0-3 and the offenses look bad. So similar case, yeah, you might be getting some market hesitancy on Denver in the survivor pools. I don't know if that'll stretch as much to Circa, but yeah, I think Denver's in play. Denver's definitely in play among those options. They're kind of that in-between play. I'm not using Buffalo or Detroit's future value, but I'm also maybe countering the popularity of Houston by staying off of them. They're certainly in that argument.
Right, and as we go through this list and before we wrap things up here, I just wanna ask you, Jason, are you looking further down this list at all? And I'm talking about the Rams favored by 3.5 against the Colts, the 49ers by a field goal against the Jags. Some people, I don't agree with this, but we've seen in our comments section early in the week the Dolphins on Monday Night Football against the Jets, some people trying to sneak the Dolphins through.
Yeah.
Does obviously Philadelphia at Tampa Bay, there's gonna be better spots for the Eagles, similar with Baltimore, at Kansas City, Minnesota in Ireland against the Pittsburgh Steelers favored by 2.5. Do any of those teams jump out at you for Circa if you have multiple entries and you might wanna sneak one through?
Yeah, I guess I should speak to this because we certainly had this debate internally last week, right? On our 10th entry. What do we do? We had Buffalo that got through on Thursday. Do we go with another Seattle? Do we didn't want to go with a third Kansas City, for example, or load up even more on Green Bay. So we actually put one on Pittsburgh, which is a similar play to Miami this week, I think, like down there, well below in risk factor. But it was as a single on the 10th entry to try to basically, if they get through, they capture kind of the same philosophy as a Seattle pick. You're getting through and you're in good shape if you make it, but it's riskier. And so they would be the one, but given how high the wind are this week, it would have to be a situation like that where I'm like, maybe I take one on Miami as my 10 on my worst entry position for the future value, where I'm just like, I'm going to use Miami on that one. And that way, if there's a Houston, New England wipeout or something, I've got a Miami as a potential to go through. That would be it, and I'm not sold you should do that. I'm just saying that would be the argument, I think, is to use Miami. Anybody else, the answer is no, because, like, San Francisco, they're gonna have better spots. The Rams are gonna have much better spots. The Bears even are gonna have better spots as a pick 'em. Like, there's just no other team, I think, showing up as a favorite. Seattle, after what happened last week, is now probably gonna be favored, for example, in week 7 against Houston, by above a field goal. And so I think there's gonna be better spots for some of those teams that are further down the board. So I wouldn't go anywhere. Miami's the only one I think is even in, like, there's some strategic sense to it in terms of what your entry would be positioned if you got it through. That's the only one I would even think, but I think it's also such a win odds drop compared to what's out there this particular week.
Yeah, that's a great point, and, I'm looking at our future value ratings. Where did it go? Miami has a little bit of future value, and I think all of that is derived from a matchup.
They play New
Where's it
Orleans.
at? Week 14 that they're at home against New Orleans.
Yep.
Who knows what the Miami Dolphins will look like in week 14, but
Mhm.
that is out there. That is definitely gonna be a favorable matchup in some respects. Whether the Dolphins are up to take advantage of that by then, we don't know. It's one of those situations that you can see, you can put it in the back of your mind. Um, but yeah, I don't think I would do Miami. Do you think we would see Miami in Grandissimo?
No. Okay,
Sweet.
I
You don't think anyone's gonna go there? Because we've seen a lot of people go with, the 3-point favorites, like San Francisco over the Saints.
a single, though. Usually, it's been a
Yeah,
single, and we're now down to, like, 50 something.
co
I don't think, given that you have 7 other options on the board, I don't think we're gonna get to an 8th, in Grandissimo. And I think Miami will come in maybe just under the full 1% in this contest. They would be a better pick than San Francisco or the Rams at 1%, in my opinion. But yeah, I don't think you're gonna see that this week in Grandissimo. I think you're gonna see more Buffalo. I think you're gonna see some Houston, but maybe not at this number. And you're gonna see more Detroit for sure, because people might not be as worried about Thanksgiving, and so they're gonna fire Detroit. So I think you're gonna see Detroit probably double this number in Grandissimo.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. And that's gonna do it for our Circa Survivor show in week 4. Thanks for laying it all out for us, Jason, and I wanna remind you all that Jason does write an article every week, on Pool Genius that is in our Circa Survivor tab of Pool Genius. Like I said, we are running a free 3-day trial for that. You can find it in the description below. And last week, Jason, I thought you did a really great write up on how to approach Seattle
Mhm.
when it makes sense to use Seattle, and then what to do if you want to avoid a popular pick like Seattle. And I'm assuming you haven't fully written it yet this week, but I'm assuming you're going to lay out the same steps of what it makes sense to do with Buffalo, Houston,
Yeah.
the Patriots, all those teams we talked about and kind of went through, giving concrete options of paths you can do and what it does to your entry moving forward. So, looking forward to that. I will definitely link that article in the description below as well. Feel free to reach out to us either in the comment section of this video or on Discord. We're over there. We're answering questions all day, every day. Jason has his own corner over there on Discord. So if you want to come over, say what's up, see what he's grilling for dinner that night, you can go and check that out. So thanks for listening and good luck in Circa Survivor week number 4.